It is my great pleasure to start us off this morning and to welcome Sara Polak. Sara is a lecturer at the Leiden University Center for the Arts and Society. Her research is on the cultural and media politics of image making and memory making of US presidents and on presidents and their use of media. Sara's publications include FDR in American Memory, as well as 2 co-edited collections embodying contagion and violence and trolling on social media. Her paper today is entitled Where's Waldo? Social Media Without Trump. Sara, many thanks for joining us today, and the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Isabel, for that kind introduction. So in stepping away from the idea that mimesis refers unproblematically to representation, a particular type of pun often crops up, I've noticed, in which something is repeated to indicate both a perfect copy and yet a self-reflexive twist. And this repetition counterintuitively often shows a show of creative cleverness, particularly visible, for instance, in memeing. When you make a meme, you copy an image macro to which you add or change something to add a new reference or a new layer of meaning. And a similar show of cleverness acts as a key affordance of the social media platform Twitter, as the platform's logo and logic of retweeting suggest. One goes there to imitate birds who imitate one another, and yet in that playful imitation lies a new field for self-expression and play. And I will develop this notion of mimesis as a field of play that offers almost boundless opportunities to blow things up, both in the sense of inflating them and in the sense of making them explode, both metaphorically and literally. Nidesh argues in an article about the insurrection moment that conspiracy theories, I'm quoting now, are hypermimetically efficacious, not only because of the false reality they represent, but also because they turn the powers of the false to contagious, intoxicating, and insurrectionist new fascist use. And I want to add to this idea a dimension of play, because I think it is missing. While conspiracy theories and other kinds of vehicles of cultural contagion, toxicity and fascism themselves have all kinds of playful aspects too, I will focus my analysis of play as a key element and driver of hypermimesis on the case study of Donald Trump's disappearance off Twitter and other social media platforms, of course, following the insurrection. And to do so, I will first offer brief definitions of worlding and play as something that is focused on worlding, and say something on why social media platforms are such effective spaces of worlding. And then I will try to answer the question where Donald Trump is in this playful dynamic of online worlding, especially now that he is no longer a clear presence on Twitter. With a handle Real Donald Trump, which of course hypermimetically also asserts his realness. To do so, I turn to 2 of his many fictional foils, both called Waldo, as it happens. The first comes from Martin Handford's Where is Waldo? And the second is from the Black Mirror episode, The Waldo Moment. And to end, I search for Trump in the many iterations of his plan to set up his own social media platform and their staggering ability to attract attention from traditional media. Worlding, in the way I use it, is a term that was first introduced by Gayatri Spivak in her essay, The Rani of Seymour, an essay in Reading the Archive. Here, Spivak explains how the colonized space is transformed and worlded, so to speak, for the natives by their colonial masters through acts such as cartography, writing, or simple traveling over the colonized land. The space was already a world where people lived, but the colonizing re-inscription of it superimposes a new worlding, not just in representing it in different ways, but also, I would add, by employing the environment's affordances in different ways. Donna Haraway has taken up this notion of worlding, but thinks about the process of worlding the more than human world in terms of symbiosis, which she explains as multi-species becoming with or co-making, making together. And that is a notion I want to take up. And this comes close to narrative world building, that concept from narratology, in the sense that it is also involved with storying, but there is a mutual back and forth between the environment that affords particular worldings and the actors who perform the worlding. And there is not necessarily a need for narrative in a traditional sense, only for its suggestion, perhaps. So in Play Matters, and now I turn to play and its relationship with worlding, Miguel Sicard argues that to play is to be in the world. So playing is a form of understanding what surrounds us and a way of engaging with others. And play, in that definition, of course, goes beyond games. It's a mode of being human, according to Sicard. And as such, he argues many non-play activities, such as work, have playful elements. So think of all the play that is possible with things that we use for work, like laptops and smartphones and all kinds of interfaces. And play is also, and I think this is really important, not necessarily fun, nor need it be harmless, innocent, or autotelic. Many approaches to, for instance, video games focus on how these games represent, say, their historical setting, or on analyzing their narrative as if it were a text. But this disregards the actual activity and engrossment in play. And as importantly, I think those kinds of approaches focus on mimesis rather than on play's hyper-mimetic potential. Its role, especially in current day politics, is in its ability to undercut and destabilize traditional ideas about representation. So Brian Sutton Smith argues about play that it is always in one way or another courting both ambiguity and escalation. And this notion seems really central to me in playing politics. Next to the idea that play, like politics, is involved in worlding. So in the American version of Martin Handford's puzzle book, Where is Wally?, the titular character is called Waldo. He is a tiny figure, red and white striped clothes, usually just a few millimeter, in an image with usually hundreds of other people. And so, but the point of the game is that Waldo is the elusive figure we are looking for. I don't want to torture the comparison with Donald Trump here. There is hardly any way in which the cheerful, slight, and unpretentious Waldo is actually like Trump. I'm just bringing up this Waldo because he has one key characteristic. He is there, but difficult to find. And the joyful, engrossing, and autotelic play activity that he affords is looking for him in a generally fun and interesting landscape. He also has an evil, if the narrative does include an evil twin whose attire is yellow and black striped, called Oddlaw, so the reverse of Waldo. And Oddlaw is generally easier to find than Waldo, but not otherwise different. And there is no other narrative in the books. And yet Waldo has generated a world, indeed has generated a transmedia franchise with not one, but two television series, and that also includes video games and comic books, a veritable fan culture, and Guinness Book of Record attempts at getting as many Waldos together, people dressed up as Waldo together in one place as possible. So it's not narrative, but it does also do world building in a sense that we know from narratology. And I think that is to do with the fact that searching for Waldo allows for worlding. Waldo's attractiveness for play lies not in his content, the narrative, but in his minuteness, finding him as an activity and process that is in itself the point. And he's always there and leads the player. The process of finding Waldo leads the player through a crowd of pictures of people who each allow for fabulation, but don't come with or really need a narrative. The original Waldo is empty and tiny and invites searching for and filling up with whatever you want. And it's clear that not only kids love him. I am, of course, not the first to suggest that conspiracy theories and their aficionados are like Waldo fans, and for that matter, like academic researchers. They love the process and the gratification of having found or being onto something, often in groups. So what Waldo and his fans do on a small scale, QAnon and its following do in a large and deeply political, on a large and deeply political scale. They engage through the game of finding in worlding. By playing, they generate and open up a world in which everything is connected, not primarily by narrative or classically mimetic representation, but because they play in it. The play and the playing field mutually co-create one another. So this is the link to sympoiesis. What I find important here is that at the center, there is something that is not there or it needs to be found. The Trump-shaped vacuum that emerged out of the January 6, 2021 insurrection in Washington, D.C., particularly on Twitter, has a similar effect. It offers an endlessly available play activity. Where is Trump? This puzzle of his absence and presence continues to engage the media. There was at least as much attention for the fact that Trump first planned and then decided not to hold a speech on January 6, 2022, as there was for current President Joe Biden's actual speech commemorating the events. Although Trump, of course, did not want to be deplatformed by Twitter, this dynamic of generating speculation, largely by not actually clearly saying or doing things, is by no means new to him. On a linguistic level, much of his speech performs a similar act. By speaking in half sentences, like a lot of people are saying, or perhaps the Second Amendment people can, without finishing the sentence, he invites speculation about what people are saying and why this is, and thus he invites conspiracism. And without legally or explicitly inciting violence, he does suggest violent intervention and therefore think it into being. The Second Amendment people, of course, know who they are and are happy enough to stand back and stand by, and also to act violently, as we have seen. And as such, Trump affords a mimetic shell, a Waldo figure that can channel a broad, if not limitless, range of messages. And as such, his open-ended messages, but even his plain absence, constitute a powerful plaything in the social media ecosystem. The Black Mirror episode, The Waldo Moment, it's aired first in 2013, is widely understood as an eerily prophetic premediation of Donald Trump's election victory in 2016. Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror is a British series of 22 standalone episodes across 5 seasons, first aired on Channel 4 between 2011 and 2014. The episodes mostly revolve around the screen of, say, television or a smartphone as a mirror of sorts, and investigate the social, cultural, and philosophical problematics involving the overabundance of screens and technology. The episode, The Waldo Moment, portrays a comedian's success, which relies on a vulgar and abusive blue cartoon bear, Waldo, who appears on a screen, which he animates. And this bear, Waldo, becomes an election candidate, and after receiving grotesque amounts of media attention, narrowly loses, but in the process, his appearance has profound influence on the political landscape. The Waldo Moment was originally one of the least successful episodes of Black Mirror, but it is an obvious case in point of what Black Mirror is doing. It toyed with the possibility of an actually powerful political agent who only exists as a screen animation, and who thus has neither an embodied original nor any actual content or articulated political position. Waldo's abusive and offensive, yet funny, bluster is loosely based on Boris Johnson's behavior, And as with Johnson, it gets Waldo a great deal of attention, but the episode only really gained a great deal of traction and critical engagement after the election of Donald Trump. Like Waldo, Trump could be understood as an inflated, empty shell, animated by provocative attention-seeking. Both Waldo and Trump, and of course Boris Johnson, feed on an overheated social media ecosystem in which the ridiculous, the outrageous, and the offensive are driving forces. Although he himself is nor has an original, Black Mirror's Waldo could be understood as a blueprint for this phenomenon, in which embodied copies have popped up around the world in politics since this episode's release. And this Waldo disrupts the classical world of liberal democratic politics by calling its bluff, not because he really reveals anything or unmasks it, but because he outbluffs it. And Waldo's provocations are unmistakably playful and funny, as is shown clearly, for instance, through the character of Gwendolyn Harris, a serious political opponent of Waldo's, who is defeated by him, yet cannot help laughing in spite of herself at his inappropriate comments. And this is also, of course, one of the ways in which Waldo is actually like Trump. Waldo's performances, even when he is played by a different animator, consistently generate escalations that unworld traditional politics and thereby open up the potential for new worldings. And the screened blueprint Waldo both channels feelings of frustration and anger at the system and politicians in a broad sense that many people do feel. And his performances open up a space for new worldings, even though nobody, least of all Waldo himself, yet know what that worlding would entail or what it would look like, but certainly not the status quo. And it is, in a sense, up for grabs and invites anyone who is not the political establishment to play with it. What the episode offers here is a perverted version of SF in the way Donna Haraway discusses it in Staying with the Trouble. Science fiction, but also speculative fabulation that rethinks and reconfigures through Black Mirror's the play that has always resided in politics and political candidacy. And political candidacy, of course, always has had, competition, and therefore has been a game or match of sorts. And it also offers SF in the sense of string figures, basic ingredients of networked society, social media, and politics that can be tinkered with and that can act as tent poles, so to speak, for world. I will turn now to Trump's suspension from the main social media platforms and focus on what Finding Donald has offered as a game, particularly to the mainstream media, Trump's supposed enemy, though of course also still his most important megaphone. And I want to suggest that Finding Donald after his banning from Twitter is actually quite similar to the way that news media outlets formed the most reliably outraged and engrossed amplifier of his tweets when they still existed or happened every day. This is certainly not to say that everything is the media's fault, but just to show that the same hypermimetic logic that Trump employed as an entertainer on Twitter, which I've previously analyzed in the context of cartoon logic, still holds even if he is not on Twitter. Basically, the point is that he always offers up an opportunity for play by just about whoever cares to take it up, and there is a wide range of takers. So recently, for example, we have heard a lot about Trump's new social media platform, Truth Social, an effort of the Trump Media and Technology Group that was eagerly awaited yet doomed from the start. I sometimes comment on American news in the Dutch media, and I've been invited by, among others, the Dutch National Radio to comment on the platform's launch in February 2022 and on various other Trump social media efforts. So I think I really see how big this is even in non-American, non-US media. The idea of Truth Social was to create a copy of Twitter that offered the possibility of radical free speech without limitations to what could be said. Posts would be called truths and retweets would be called retruths. And for a while, Truth Social was the most downloaded app in the Apple Store. But there was immediately also a really long waiting list for an account, and the site was hacked on the first day of its operation. And just over a month after its launch, 3 of its top executives resigned in defiance of the platform's CEO, Devin Nunes. And Devin Nunes, as I'm sure you know, was a Republican member of the House of Representatives from 23 to 2022, and a staunch Trump supporter who gave up his seat to become CEO of Truth Social. And Trump himself has to date posted only a single truth on the platform, which generally lacks accessibility and interaction. He's been rumored to have been fuming about the platform's failure and to have openly considered joining Getter, one of its competitors. So all of this new social media platform has basically led to speculation without any actual big traffic even. Truth Social is also, to be sure, not the first time Trump has tried to start a new social media platform since he was banned from Twitter. Predecessors like 45office.com, which was launched in March 21, and From the Desk of Donald J. Trump, launched in May 2021, have equally taken up a disproportionately large space in worldwide news cycles at the time of their announcement and launch, especially compared to how utterly unsuccessful they were. At least they are successful at generating media attention, but not as themselves working as the kind of megaphone Trump had with Twitter. And in the meantime, as I'm sure you've heard, since Truth Social's failure, billionaire and Tesla CEO Elon Musk has made a bid of, I think the latest is 46.5 billion to become Twitter's single shareholder. Musk believes that Twitter should moderate users' posts less and should not have suspended Donald Trump for life. And if this hostile takeover does take place, Trump will most probably be able to return to his original social media platform of choice. And speculation about what this would do also for his chances in a re-election bid in 2024 obviously abound. So in conclusion, it seems to me that play is a key element of mimesis in the classical sense of play as enacting, for instance, what adults do, but particularly in the post-mimetic turn sense as a form of worlding and through disruption and unworlding. Although it is paramount that we understand play as something that is not only positive, but can really also break down democracy, I think it is necessary that we see its power in politics and its omnipresence. I started out this talk with an example of how Twitter revolves around repeating others' words, and yet also around finding smartness and irony in doing so. And the same is true of producing, adapting, and spreading memes. And many people, including journalists, politicians, and academics, do this, even when they indulge in speculating about Trump's absence from Twitter. They literally repeat potentially newsworthy developments or rumors and give them meaning, usually with a self-reflexive meta slant that can in fact also be observed, although with a different purpose, but similar playfulness, in a great deal of academic discourse about mimesis. And I see this, for instance, in puns like, you know, the notion of Homo sapiens, sapiens. There's a literal repetition of the sapiens, and yet the cleverness resides in the fact that the first qualifies Homo and the second sapiens qualifies sapiens. So the human beings who know that they know, whose humanity resides partly in the self-reflective and self-conscious awareness of their knowledge as a human trait, is reflected also in the cleverness of the pun. And you know, this is something that has been used quite widely. And I've also done the same, for instance, when I wrote about the contagion. So the notion of that the contagion metaphor is itself contagious. And all of this is important because each iteration of Trump trying to, but then failing to return to his erstwhile social media prowess, is itself an iteration of something we already know all too well, yet do not seem to tire of. Trump's gestures, statements, performances, and also perhaps even especially the suggestion of impending gestures that don't happen and statements that don't really come about, or performances that aren't actually performed, are media events in themselves that spawn endless representations in traditional media, think pieces, social media posts, memes. And so even as non-action constantly sets off mimetic cycles, which are simultaneously slavish in their compulsiveness, doesn't this ever get boring, one might wonder, and yet also self-reflexive, playful, and tongue-in-cheek. So no, it doesn't get boring, because the ingredients of the game, there is something to search for. This is constantly done communally across social media platforms, and there is endless room for playing and worlding remaining present. Thank you very much.